How's everyone doing today? I hope that in this 6th week of quarantine, you are making the best of it with your family, with your little ones. It's a little chilly in here today. This weather outside, it's in the 50s here where I'm at, so I've got my blanket. Okay, so today's topic is going to be about sleep pressure, the homeostatic control mechanism. So during these lives, I have been doing a segment on understanding sleep in order to better understand your child. We've gone over sleep cycles, the different types of sleep state. I went over circadian rhythms last week, which is one of the two mechanisms that contribute to our alertness or our sleepiness. And today's topic is going to be about the second one, which is the homeostatic control mechanism, what controls sleep pressure. But before we get started, let me introduce myself. My name is Megan Robert. In case you don't know, I am owner of After the Stork. I am a child sleep consultant, postpartum doula, and a former nanny. So I help families who are struggling with sleep. That is my main focus. I help the families that want to be proactive or the families that are struggling. If you would like more information on how I can help your family, you can download a free document at afterthestorksleep.com/what is entailed. Again, per usual, I'm also going to go over my disclaimer. I am not a medical professional. I help families from a behavioral perspective. So these videos that I provide, any free resources that you get, they're for educational and informational purposes only, meant to promote the general understanding of children and their sleep for parents and anyone who works with younger children. The information contained within these videos and any resources provided are not intended as and shall not be understood or construed as medical advice or substitute for medical advice. If your child snores or mouth breathes, please reach out to your pediatrician, an ENT, a sleep specialist, just to make sure there's no underlying medical issues that can contribute to your child's sleep. And if you do have any concerns or medical issues, please consult your pediatrician or other healthcare provider. All right, so let's go ahead and dive in. So as a parent of a young one, I imagine you've experienced that moment where you're out running errands or you have to go pick up the older kid from daycare, or maybe it's the kid from daycare that you're picking up and you're trying to get home for nap time and your child falls asleep in the car for 5 minutes. Or you're out running in the stroller and your child falls asleep again for a short portion of that time. And this prevents your child from having a decent nap. You know that if your child falls asleep in the car, it's going to completely throw off nap time or possibly cause bedtime struggles. So today's topic is going to help you understand why that is the case, and it's going to help you understand why you might want to try to rearrange your day so that that's not happening, or different tips on how to work with that. So like I mentioned, last week I talked about the circadian rhythm. So this week I'm going to be talking about the homeostatic control mechanism. We also refer to this as sleep pressure, homeostatic drive, sleep drive. It's what is based on how long we've been awake or how long we've been asleep. So it contributes to how tired we are or how awake we might feel. So we're going to talk about what is it exactly. And we're going to talk about how it works indirectly with the circadian rhythm to contribute to sleep. And then we're going to go over some tips of how to help your child either to avoid the falling asleep in the car or in the stroller, or how to help your child when you're in those moments. Because let's be honest, sometimes it's not avoidable. So first, what is it? So homeostatic control mechanism, this is one of my favorite sleep topics. And I know I say that, but really the circadian rhythm and the sleep pressure, two of my favorite topics. So in our brain, there's this chemical that's called adenosine. Adenosine builds up when we are awake. So when we wake up for the day, adenosine starts to build up in your brain, and you've got these receptors in your brain that absorb the adenosine. The more that you're awake, the more adenosine builds up. The more adenosine that you have in your brain, the more tired you feel. So this contributes to sleep pressure. So the longer you're awake, the more tired you're going to feel. Now when you sleep gets rid of that adenosine. And so it helps to remove that chemical so that when you wake up for the day, you feel refreshed. Now, for children, for adults, this happens for most of us. Our sleep pressure reaches a high where we get this really strong urge to fall asleep after we've been awake for about 12 to 16 hours. However, for children, the sleep pressure is way more powerful for them. Hence, napping throughout the day, shorter periods of being awake, and you notice that when they are tired, unless they are extremely overtired, that when they're tired, they need to go to sleep. And so this sleep pressure contributes to your child feeling tired or lacking the adenosine, your child feeling awake. So when your child wakes up, sleep pressure is down, and at the longer that your child's awake, sleep pressure goes up. So that quickly explains why if your child falls asleep for even 5 minutes in the car, regardless if it was at the right time or not, that sleep pressure has gone down, and now your child has a difficult time falling asleep for naps. So do your best to try to have your child napping at the appropriate times and not allowing your child to fall asleep for even just a couple minutes in between those times. Now, how does this work with the circadian rhythm? So you know, sleep pressure, the longer you're awake, adenosine is going to build up. So sleep pressure is just going to continue to rise. So why don't we feel extremely tired? We have times when we feel awake, and then we have a dip in the day for adults, and then we get alert again. So we become more alert, we're more focused after that dip. Well, the reason for that is because circadian rhythm and sleep pressure together contribute to how alert or how sleepy we feel. So that urge to fall asleep might not be as strong even though adenosine is rising because the circadian rhythm is rising as well. So to give you a good idea, I'm going to show you some graphs that show how adenosine and the circadian rhythm work together. So the circadian rhythm, regardless if you sleep or not, it's going to constantly go up and down. So that sleep, that alert and drowsy state are going to rise and then fall, rise and then fall. However, adenosine is dependent on whether or not you sleep. So if you stay awake, adenosine continues to rise. If you fall asleep, then the adenosine drops and your sleep pressure drops. So here is a graph to show you. Let's see if I can get this both on Facebook and Instagram. Okay, here's a graph to show you. So this bottom curve is the circadian rhythm. The circadian rhythm goes up and then goes down, up and then down throughout the entire 24-hour period. Adenosine, however, will continue to rise no matter what until you sleep. Then it will drop. So this represents the beginning of the day. Circadian rhythm is rising and your adenosine levels are low, so sleep pressure is low. This is one of the times of day when we feel the most alert. So if you see this gap between the circadian rhythm and the sleep pressure, you'll understand why certain times of day are important for sleeping. So let me show you here. If you see this little arrow, this is not a good time to sleep. The circadian rhythm is at its peak. Sleep pressure is pretty low. The gap between the two is very small. However, if you notice here, the circadian rhythm is dipping, and please don't pay attention to these numbers. These are graphs for adults, but showing you how they work can show you how your child's sleep works. So the circadian rhythm is dipping, sleep pressure is high. This gap right here is huge. Therefore, your sleep drive is huge. So you have a much easier time falling asleep, and in fact, if you try not to, it's very difficult to stay awake. So here is what happens when we miss that moment when the circadian rhythm is low and sleep pressure high. So this explains why nap times that aren't happening at the appropriate time of day will affect your child and make it more difficult to sleep. So again, don't pay attention to the times. These are times for adults. So circadian rhythm is dipping and sleep pressure is rising. This gap right here is really big. This is the time that we want to get our children down for naps. We want to find that window when the circadian rhythm is low, so your child's in a very drowsy state. Sleep pressure is high, and so your child's urge to fall asleep is even higher. Now, what happens when we miss this window, if we don't put our children down when this is happening, the circadian rhythm is starting to rise. So even though sleep pressure continues to rise, the circadian rhythm is rising, and that urge to sleep is even shorter. So do you see why this is an easier time to fall asleep than this time? Now, if your child doesn't sleep, or let's say I'm sure back in college or, back in the day, you pulled all-nighters. So you did not sleep. That means that your sleep pressure continued to rise. Even though your circadian rhythm stayed the same, your sleep pressure continued to rise. But why would you feel, I'm sure you've experienced where you feel that moment where you just feel miserable and you're exhausted, but then all of a sudden you get like this second wind and you're able to focus. That is what's happening right here. Your circadian rhythm was going up. Same for your child if your child is having a difficult time napping because they didn't go down early enough. Now, when you stay up past that time, if you stay up longer and you ignore that sleep drive, the sleep drive continues to go up. So sleep pressure continues to rise. And then we have this large gap between the circadian rhythm and sleep pressure. So although you or your child, when you've missed this sleep window, you feel more alert here, once you've reached this state, you feel this huge urge to sleep even more. So circadian rhythm, we're going to talk about how caffeine affects you, but also your child with this, and then some tips on how to manage those moments when maybe your child does fall asleep in the car, and so that sleep drive has been diminished. Okay, so first we're going to touch on caffeine, because this one has a little bit more of an explanation with it, and then I'll just rattle off some tips to help with those moments in the car. But the caffeine can be applied to you or your child. Caffeine is one of just a few addictive drugs that we readily give to our children. Soda, tea, sometimes even coffee. So avoid caffeine as much as you can so that your child is able to fall asleep. Because here's what caffeine does to your system. It affects sleep pressure. When caffeine is in our system, it blocks the receptors that will grab onto that adenosine that I mentioned that builds up, that chemical. And so even though adenosine will continue to build the longer you're awake, your brain is not triggered to shut off the areas of the brain that are more of a wake state. Your brain is not triggered then to signal to the areas of your brain that help you sleep. So the caffeine is blocking those receptors and blocking your brain from being triggered to say, hey, I'm tired. Same happens for your child. And so when you are experiencing that, it is much harder to fall asleep. And even if you do fall asleep, if that caffeine is still blocking those receptors when you sleep, the adenosine is not going to be removed like it is supposed to be during sleep. So then what happens? You wake up the next morning and you feel exhausted even though you got the right amount of sleep because you had caffeine closer to bedtime or within a certain amount of time that prevented you from sleeping well. So you weren't able to remove that adenosine. You wake up the next day, you're exhausted. So what do you do this time? You get 2 shots of espresso instead of your normal 1. Or you drink 2 cups of coffee instead of just 1 cup of coffee. Now, something to keep in mind when you are having caffeine or if you're giving caffeine to your kids. Caffeine has a half-life of 5 to 7 hours. This means that the caffeine that you take in, it takes 5 to 7 hours for 50% of that caffeine to be removed from your system. So if you have caffeine with dinner, if you have a soda or coffee at dinner time, you're still experiencing caffeine blockage for those receptors in your brain for the adenosine halfway into the night. And then even after that, there's still caffeine in your system because, again, it has that 50% half-life. Half-life of 5 to 7 hours. So that means that even after 50% of the caffeine is gone, now it's going to take another 5 to 7 hours to get rid of the other 50% of what's left. So the big tip here: avoid caffeine for your children, especially if they're napping, and avoid caffeine within a certain amount of time for yourself. Now, every individual is a little bit different, but if you are having trouble falling asleep, so let's say that you do struggle with your child going to bed at night, it takes an hour or two, but by the time you get into bed, it's difficult for you to fall asleep. Try to avoid caffeine past 1 or 2 p.m. Okay, one other thing with caffeine. Decaf does not mean non-caffeinated. Decaf drinks usually still have 15 to 30% of what's in a normal caffeinated beverage. So make sure that if you are having a beverage prior to bedtime, that it's non-caffeinated and not decaf. Decaf can still prevent you from having good sleep. All right, so now on to more tips that are more focused towards your children. The biggest one that I will say is work around your child's naps when you can. So if you have to go run errands the moment that your child gets up when they're more awake, so that it's not closer to the time when their sleep pressure is high and so their sleep drive is high. That way they're not likely to fall asleep in the car. This means times that you run errands, appointments that you make. If you have to pick up your child from daycare or school, whether it's your child that is falling asleep in the car or you have another child at home with you that has to come along with you for the ride, talk to the daycare. See if can you pick up that child a little bit later in the day? Can you pick them up earlier? Can you work around it so that you're not having to pick up your child the moment that they need to be taking a nap? Second one is park your car. So if you are out running errands and your child might fall asleep in the car because you weren't able to work around the nap schedule, park your car when your child falls asleep. This will allow your child to get really good sleep, because when you're in motion, we don't sleep as well. So if you park the car, you allow your child to have a better chance of having a nap that's going to be more restorative than if you were to try to drive home and then put your child down for the next nap. So what I say to parents is, if this happens to you frequently, or if you are picking up another child from daycare, take something to do in the car and park your car when your child falls asleep and do whatever it is that you need to work on. Number 3, set up realistic expectations. If you are not able to work around your child's naps, if your child is extremely tired, overtired, you need to work on their schedule a bit, just set up realistic expectations so that you're prepared. If you know you're going to have to go somewhere when it's almost nap time, plan for the next nap to be a little bit ruined. Plan for a rough, rest of the day. But then get back on track. Have an earlier bedtime to make up for that lost sleep at nap time. Or the next day, plan to get right back on track with the appropriate times for naps to help your child get back to where they're not overtired, that we don't create this snowball effect. And the last one is prevent environmental disturbances early in the morning. So noises and light can make it much more difficult for a child to stay asleep or to fall back asleep if they wake up early in the morning. So I talked about REM sleep 2 weeks ago. We talked about sleep cycles. REM sleep is more prevalent in the morning. And so if your child wakes, which is also normal, it is normal for everyone to wake in the middle of the night a couple times because of our sleep cycles. But because the sleep cycles earlier in the morning consist more of REM sleep, it is much easier for a child to be woken from noises or just even a little bit of light coming through the windows. So try to make it where there aren't disturbances in the environment that wake your child, because once your child's awake, earlier in the morning it is much more difficult to fall asleep due to sleep pressure being low. So those are my tips for you today. I hope you enjoyed that with the sleep pressure. Next week we'll be kind of putting all of this together. So like I mentioned, I've talked about sleep cycles over the past couple weeks. I've talked about the 2 systems that regulate sleep, so the circadian rhythms, and this one now that we're talking about, the homeostatic control mechanism. So we'll talk about how do those all really go together, since now that you kind of have a little bit of a background on it based on all of the videos, I can kind of quickly go through it to help you understand what's important to help your child sleep. I'll say the one of the main ones is schedules. Keep your child on a schedule. Now, newborns are not going to be on a schedule, but realistically around 4 months and up, we can start creating a schedule and that will help your child to sleep better. Do I have any questions from anyone while I'm here? Questions? So just a reminder, if you are struggling with your child's sleep, you know, like if it's not a quick adjustment of, oh, making sure my child stays on the right schedule. Another big component to sleeping well is being able to fall asleep independently. So if your child is missing this one, this is going to be a key component to help your child achieve in order to start sleeping really well, because consolidated sleep is important. But if you are someone who's struggling with your child's sleep, I can help you. You can, again, go to afterthestorksleep.com/what is entailed, and I have information on what working with me looks like. I help families in several ways. If you're wanting to be proactive, let's say you've got a newborn or you know your child's about to reach a milestone, you're thinking about transitioning from the crib to the big kid bed, or if you're someone who's struggling, if your child is putting up a fight at bedtime, taking short or no naps, waking frequently at night, coming into your room. Right now, a lot of my clients are actually preschool age. Generally, I get a lot of babies, but right now, a lot of my clients are preschool age. With this whole COVID-19 pandemic and us being stuck at home, it can be very difficult for a preschooler. And so we start to see behaviors that we didn't see before. The fear of the unknown causes their imagination to go wild. And it starts to prevent sleep from being good. Maybe it was a month ago and now it's becoming more difficult. So that's what I'm seeing a lot of right now. And I can help you if that's you. So again, afterthestorksleep.com/what is entailed. I hope that you guys enjoyed this. I will see you next week on Tuesday at 1 p.m.